Thanks, Jonathan. It's good to see you again. Good to see all of y'all. So, as Jonathan said, I've been in the software business for around 35 years. Agile, really, for the last 13. Um, most of the companies have been small startup style companies. So, let's dive into my presentation. And as we go, I'll probably need to do some kind of level setting to help explain some of the stuff that I'm going to show you. So, let me get my screen shared. Let's do that. And move this out of the way. So can y'all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So tips and tricks of a formerly retired Scrum Master. Being retired is something that I am horrible at. We can talk about that later if y'all want. So there's two main focuses here of my presentation. One is project management in an agile software company. So I've got some visual aids to show you, and I'll explain what they're used for. And then after we get through that, we'll talk about some Scrum tips and tricks, things that I've noticed through my journey that are easy to kind of fall in a rut and kind of just go through the motions without really paying attention to what you're actually supposed to be doing and what the teams specifically are supposed to be doing. So let's talk about project management first. So this is kind of some information radiation items I'm going to show you. So one of the assumptions I have about this is, since mostly I've been working for startups, the assumption is that you do not have access to any sophisticated project management, project reporting software, right? So maybe you've got Jira for your Scrum teams to use. And then other than that, you've got Microsoft Office or the Google suite of spreadsheets and documents, but there is no sophisticated project planning, data collection, and reporting system. Okay. So we'll talk about one of the visual aids that you can use when you talk to senior leadership and stakeholders about here's what we planned and here's where we actually are. And then we'll talk about some information radiation outwards to Scrum teams and maybe your product teams and product owners. Tips and tricks will be sprinting, retrospectives, and sprint demos. So before we dive into project management, one of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot is a wall walk. So let me explain what a wall walk is, just to make sure that
Clay,
we're, yes.
sorry, I'm going to interrupt real quick. While Clay is totally open to asking questions during, so you don't have to wait until the end, but he will time box you. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. So if you got a question, feel free just to ask away. All right. So a wall walk. A wall walk to me is a plan. That means that a Scrum team has planned multiple sprints to achieve a certain goal, to release a new version of the software, add some existing features that'll go out at a certain date. So what you're looking at now is obviously a pre-COVID example of a wall walk at a company I used to work at, where these two teams have planned 8 sprints. Nowadays, I would never ask a team to plan 8 sprints out at once, because the likelihood of actually doing in that 8 sprint what you said you were going to do is very low. Today, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 sprints. So a wall walk just means it's a plan. The team has planned out one or more features, and that becomes the goal that gets communicated. We think we can get this done in this particular amount of time. So if this is our plan, if this is our wall walk, and we're going to be talking to senior leadership, your C-suite, key stakeholders in different departments, how are you going to update them regularly with, here was our plan, which is kind of what we're looking at now, and here's where we actually stand, with an eye towards how can you explain deviations from that plan, right? So what can you do that shows, here's our plan, here's what we've actually completed so far, here's what's left to be completed, here's stuff that's taken longer or been done earlier. You can use this for communicating to your senior leadership, but also at the tail end, you can also use it for a release retrospective or a feature retrospective or a wall walk retrospective with your Scrum teams, where you say, here's what you planned and here's what you actually did. Can you learn anything to improve next time you go through this? So what would that thing look like? Let's take a peek. All right, so can y'all see the spreadsheet now? Okay, so what this shows is this is obviously just a very simple spreadsheet. So down on the left, I've got my epics or my features or whatever major components we're working on. And then we've got some Gantt bars just through the spreadsheet cells. The green is the planned, the yellow is the actual, the red is the not done, right? So here it's anybody in any leadership position should be able to understand. For example, for this particular feature, we planned it to be done in sprints 3 and 4. And here's my sprint ending dates to give them that time perspective. But we didn't do it as planned. We started a sprint late and we ended a sprint late, right? So one of the things you could do based on this sample is, well, this particular feature, which we planned for 2 sprints, took actually 3 sprints. So that, assuming these were the same team, this team got a late start because this other feature took longer. And I'll explain these numbers here in just a minute. So this is simple, easy to put together, shows the plan, shows what you actually did. Well, how can you capture the work that was the team or teams were asked to do that was not planned at all? This unplanned or interruption work, whether it's production support issues, we've got to do a new feature to get a client to sign a contract or to keep them from walking, or whatever the reason is. Well, down here at the bottom, you can start capturing, not necessarily on a ticket by ticket level, but on a bucket or feature level. Here's the work that the team has been asked or teams have been asked to do that was never part of the plan, right? So if you've got a lot of stuff down here on the bottom, that's probably one, if not the major reason why you're not hitting your dates, you're not getting things done as you had planned, right? You can make this spreadsheet as detailed or as complicated as you want it to be. And you can tailor it to, y'all know your leadership, your stakeholders, certainly better than I ever will. So you know how they work, how they read stuff. You can modify this to be more meaningful to them. But at its base, it's just a simple Gantt chart. And I did this in Google Sheets because working for a startup, we don't have a lot of expensive tools. I can't get project. Not sure they'd want to look at a big project plan anyway. And you can update this, not necessarily maybe after every sprint, but let's say you have a monthly meeting with senior leadership, updated before every monthly meeting. Now the numbers, which I've only put in a few boxes here, I've used this before with Scrum teams. After they've done a wall walk, they've planned a certain number of sprints, they've executed them, we're done, shipped. Now we want to have kind of a release retrospective or a wall walk retrospective. One of the things that I got feedback from the teams was, without these numbers, which are 5 is the number of tickets, /13 is the number of points. All right, so that's probably not something you want to show to your leadership unless they're sophisticated, but yet your development teams may want to see that. So for example, if I didn't have any data here and the team is looking at this, say, well, okay, it looks like this one particular feature ran a sprint long, right? Because we said it was going to be 2 sprints, but we actually took 3. Well, what if in that 3rd sprint, they did 1 ticket for 1 point? That's not much of a slip in schedule, right? So they ask, well, can you put some kind of indication that lets us know how much relative work did we do in that last sprint, right? So there's a difference between if this was 1/1 or 10/40, right? As far as how big the slip in schedule was, okay? So again, we're showing time, we're showing the plan, and we're showing progress on the plan, and we're also showing deviations from the plan, unscheduled work that the teams have been asked to do. So I'll pause here for a second for any questions before we keep going. Okay, so this is an artifact that you could produce to share with senior leadership, as you know your senior leadership and you know the verbiage that they'd like to see. Well, what about a little bit more detailed view of the same thing? So how can you give the Scrum teams a little bit more detail about here's what you planned and here's what you actually did? And what I'm fixing to show you would be meaningful if you plan multiple sprints at a time or not. So if your Scrum teams don't do wall walks, they don't do planning sprints, right, where they're planning multiple sprints over a series of days. If they're just having a sprint planning meeting on day one of a sprint, as an example, and they sprint, then they have a sprint planning meeting on the first day of the next sprint and they sprint, and they never really take a break to plan any large number of sprints other than the one that they're getting ready to work on. This could still be useful. So what does it look like? So it again can be done as a simple spreadsheet. So what I'm showing is this shows multiple teams. And again, let's assume that they've all done wall walks. They plan multiple sprints. Well, what you can do is you can design a series of buckets or groupings that each ticket that gets done goes into. And again, these buckets are based on the plan, even if the plan is the planning sprint on day one of a sprint. I've typically used these 5. Your mileage may vary. Y'all may find a different set of groupings are meaningful. So every ticket that gets done according to plan can either be early, like it was planned in sprint 3, but it was actually finished in sprint 2. On time means it was delivered, it was completed when it was planned. Late, opposite of early. Not done, meaning not being completed at all. Extra means unplanned. This was work that the team got tasked with after the wall walk was over and they're sprinting merrily along. There are multiple sprints to achieve the goal. This is your extra work that maybe is causing your team to deviate from the plan. One of the nice things you can do is you can add filters to this. So I've got a column for a release, could be a feature. I've got a filter for my teams. So if you've got multiple teams on here, you can filter to one or more team. This is your epics, could be your features, assuming you're doing one feature per epic. And this is actually your sprints. So what you can do is, if I'm talking to a particular team, like let's say team 1, and we're in a sprint retrospective, and we want to see how the team's been doing, I can filter this down and say, okay, for the most recent sprint, all 11 story points you delivered were on time. So good job, team. Y'all said you were going to do these 3 things, and you did these 3 things. High quality, right? I can also filter it by feature, regardless of sprint or regardless of Scrum team. So if I want to look at a particular feature, say this one, I'm not worried about sprint. I'm not worried about team. I just care about the overall work that the team's been done for this particular feature. So here's one feature, one epic, which goes across 2 teams and goes across 2 sprints. And here's the same thing. And I try to color code the chart, green being good. Green is your early and on time. Red being your late or not done. Extra being kind of your gold. I don't know if we've got any old project managers here that are used to the term gold plating, right? Work that the team does that wasn't really asked for. It's that extra work. So you can change the coloring scheme. You can change what filters that you use. You can change how you group your tickets. So even if you had a team that wasn't doing, planning multiple sprints at a time, they were just planning one sprint at a time, you can still punch that data in here on a sprint by sprint basis and say, here's what you did early. And if there's stories that are late that were supposed to be done in sprint 1, and you make this a cumulative spreadsheet. You don't just create a new spreadsheet for each sprint. You just keep adding one sprint after another after another. Then you can start looking at how many tickets has the team been delivering late? How many teams did the ticket say they were going to do in a sprint and then never even get done for whatever reason? Be careful though, because in the hands of an untrained person, if they see a chart like this and see a lot of red, they immediately think, well, something's wrong. We got to go fix something. Something's broken. What? That doesn't necessarily mean that anything is wrong. It just means, and again, those reasons are not captured here. You could put notes if you wanted to out here to the side, but it could be that the team got pulled off of this work. They got interrupted with other things. Y'all are assuming y'all got tons of experience. Y'all know all the reasons why teams don't meet their goals. It's not always that the team is doing something wrong. Okay. This is not something I would share with senior leadership unless your senior leadership, your stakeholders are very familiar with your Agile development process, because you don't want them going down the rabbit hole of, well, I played with the filters and I see team 1 is delivering 15 story points a sprint and team 3 is delivering 40 story points a sprint. And that just opens up a whole can of worms. I'm sure you've done it. It's never fun. So I'm not saying what you should or should not do, but this is something that I share with the Scrum teams. We talk about it in retrospectives, share it with product. Senior leadership doesn't see this. We might tell them that this is one of the tools that we're doing to help the teams track their performance and be better, but I'm not going to be distributing this on a sprint by sprint basis. So any questions about this before we keep going? Okay.
I have a little question, maybe a comment. So I understand that when you're in a startup environment, you probably don't have a lot of tools available to you. There are statistic and reporting modules for Jira, and I'm wondering, are you supporting multiple Scrum teams as a Scrum Master? And if so, how much overhead do you have in creating these spreadsheets?
Right now, where I'm at now, we have 6 teams, 3 are Kanban, 3 are Scrum. I'm Scrum Master for one of the Scrum teams, but I'm responsible for doing these kinds of updates on a sprint by sprint basis for all the teams. It doesn't take up all of my time. I am working full time. I am involved with other non-Scrum related work.
Right.
And your mention about Jira plugins, I have seen some Jira plugins that I would like to use. We are using basically plain vanilla
Yep.
Jira right now, because when I go ask for money, a lot of times I get told no.
Right. Understood.
Yeah.
So
So
are you coaching the other Scrum Masters to help you collect this data?
yes, yes.
Good.
And the next visual aid I'm going to show you, it is the job of the Scrum Master to update. I'm not involved in it at all. So this particular pie chart spreadsheet we're looking at right now, I'm updating it for all 3 Scrum teams, but I do plan to transition that because as we grow, I can't be spending 40 hours a week doing data collection, verifying, producing charts, putting it up on Confluence for people to see, and then make sure people are using it. I just won't have the time. Good point. Okay, so one other thing, probably the least impactful so far, is a velocity chart. So we use Jira now, and I'm used to using Jira and TFS in past Team Foundation Server in past lives. Jira does show the team their velocity over a certain number of sprints. It shows how many points they committed to at the start of the sprint and how many points were in the done column at the end of the sprint. We'd like to see a little bit more useful data, and we'd like to give the team some control over, especially when it comes up to their average velocity. So we like for teams to look at a recent set of sprints to help them determine what their average velocity is, rather than saying, well, last sprint we did 20, so this sprint we should do 20. Well, what if 20 was a really tough sprint, had some holidays, and you had some people on vacation? So we typically like to get Scrum teams to, again, self-organize and decide what number of most recently completed sprints do you want to use when it comes to determine what your average velocity is. And yes, I'm sure there's some nice plugins that you get in Jira to show you that. I've not been able to figure out how to do it in plain Jane vanilla. So here's what we do now. And this is an example of something. This is the responsibility of the Scrum Master to update at the end of every sprint. And it's really simple. All we're charting is the most, and in this case, for this team, the 6 most recently completed sprints. The blue lines show what they committed to at the start of the sprint. The red line shows what they actually delivered and got done. And then we've got some simple bar charts that show you the average, the min, and the max. Some teams may want to go with the most recent 6 sprints. Some teams, the most recent 4. It just depends. As long as it's not the most recent 12 sprints, which is probably not a very good indication of team performance, we kind of leave it up to the team. So on the surface, this chart, there's really nothing special about this. All this data you can get from Jira, we're just putting in a different format. But, and we'll talk about sprint demos later, we also have the teams, and this is the tabular data that feeds that graph. You can use this to track other data. So for example, when we talk about sprint demos, which member of the team did the last sprint demo, right? If the teams want to rotate it. Teams now are putting notes over here. So if they have a rough sprint, like, hey, this was the first time we've ever integrated our software with a third party, and we thought it was going to be easy, and it was a nightmare. So we're going to create a checklist the next time we have to do an integration with a third party. Don't forget this, don't forget that, don't forget this, which could also be part of their retrospective artifact, which we'll talk about. So teams are starting to also use this to keep sprint by sprint notes of good sprint, bad sprint, a lot of vacations, a lot of COVID sicknesses, whatever. So that if they get asked, hey, I'm looking at your sprint chart and this looks to be kind of a wackadoodle sprint compared to the one previous, what happened? Maybe they can recite it from memory and maybe they can't. Maybe they want to go to some kind of note that says, well, here's why that sprint was horrible, XYZ. Okay. So this is an example of something that we're asking the Scrum teams to do themselves. And that previous pie chart is something that we'll be asking them to update in the near future so that it saves Clay's sanity. So any questions, comments about this before I keep going?
I like to say that the only reason to track velocity is help teams be able to accurately or more accurately calculate future capacity. Like when I have leaders that want to see these stats, I never want to let them track these stats because they tend to try to compare teams against each other. And if people are interested in having a radiator, they can show their stakeholders. I prefer something like a say to do ratio. How many sprints were in your, or how many points were in your original sprint plan that you actually finished? And then if you want to show velocity as well, you can, but velocity doesn't tell the whole picture because all the points you finished may not have been in your original plan. I like teams to be predictable, like make a good sprint plan and deliver what's in your sprint plan. And if you can't, let us know why. And then maybe as an organization, we can change to make it better. Anyway, just a comment.
That's a great point, Mike, because some of the work that I'm doing now is we are trying to quantify, give some statistics that we can track on unplanned work, right? So if you think back to that very first chart that I showed, the little simple Gantt chart, and we're showing some unplanned work down at the bottom. We're not showing how is that work relative to the actual planned or delivered work. So
yeah, and you're already collecting all the numbers that you need to calculate that, because if it's your Scrum Master's responsibility to collect those numbers, make them identify which points were in the original plan. That's your say do ratio. That's the one that you want really good.
yeah,
And then out of curiosity, how many points were in your final delivered that were unplanned? Those are metrics that I care about. The only reason I track velocity is for planning purposes, to help the team know what their capacity is. Anyway, sorry, I'll be quiet.
no, Mike, those are all valid points. I appreciate that. And yes, this chart, looking at this chart, the main reason that the Scrum teams look at this chart is when they're in sprint planning. We're planning a new sprint. How many story points do we think we can get in this sprint? Outside of that, they may not look at this often during the sprint or at all. So Mike's points are valid. Okay, so diving merrily right along, now I'm going to segue into just some, I don't want to say random tips and tricks, but things that I've noticed throughout my career and things that I'm noticing now. So some of these things that I'm going to be talking about are kind of hot topics for me right now. So teams are sprinting, right? So we want the teams to be brave and transparent. So if, for example, you felt that you had a Scrum team where there was a member of the team that didn't feel comfortable saying something in a stand-up, in a retrospective, in a backlog grooming meeting, that is something that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. And I've had it happen in the past. And thankfully, they've been fairly easy. Those situations have been fairly easy to solve, but the teams need to be brave and transparent and hold each other accountable. So let's talk about daily stand-up meetings. So we know daily stand-up meetings are for the team to plan their day, not to give status to stakeholders or whoever else happens to mosey merrily along into the Zoom meeting or wander by before COVID. But the teams need to hold each other accountable. If I come to a stand-up meeting and the team is showing their board, so let's say we're talking Zoom, and there's a user story in the middle of the sprint, halfway through the process, and it has no story points on it. Clay should not be the one that says, why is there a user story with no points on it in the middle of the sprint? The team should say that, right? It's the team's job to hold each other accountable. If I'm the first one to notice it, well, the team needs to get a little bit better about holding each other accountable. People are ticket centric, right? So a lot of times for a Kanban team, rather than a Kanban team showing up and Bob saying I'm doing this and John saying I'm doing this and Susie saying I'm doing this, some Kanban teams like to work their board right to left, right? So the farther a ticket is across the board, the more valuable their time is spent getting that complete, if possible, versus starting something brand new. Scrum teams can kind of do the same thing. The challenge with doing it either people-centric or ticket-centric, and 99% of people are going to do it people-centric, is what if a team comes to a stand-up, there's 4 people on the Scrum team, they all say what they're going to do, and nobody talks about the ticket that is almost ready for the product owner to accept. Nobody's touching it, nobody's working on it. That's still probably the most valuable thing for the team to focus on. Flip situation, if you're doing ticket-centric, like even for a Kanban team, what if you're talking about tickets and you're working your board right to left and Bob never says anything during the stand-up, right? So people, are you making sure that the tickets are getting covered? And if you're doing it ticket-centric, are we making sure that Bob is communicating with his team and planning what his day is going to be? Make sure that any requests for actions are discussed, stated actions are understood. So one of the things that's been driving me nuts lately is a team is planning their day. Bob says, okay, I got this ticket done. It's in the review column. I need somebody to do a code review and I'm starting a new ticket. And then Susie says this and Steve says this and JoJo says this. Stand up is over and nobody said, oh, I can do a code review on that ticket. Maybe I can't do it right now, but I'll take a break this afternoon and I'll look at it. Get that day planned. If somebody says, I need something, somebody on the team should say, I will do it and here is when I will do it. Okay, if somebody says I'm starting a new ticket, what that person is doing is committing the team to getting that ticket that is now in flight done by the end of the sprint, which they should be planning to do anyway. So if it's towards the end of the sprint and the sprint's looking a little shaky about getting everything tied up, I'd like to hear the other team members say, whoa, 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 let's maybe you can help us do this other stuff and get some of the in-flight stuff done before we start something totally new, right? So we're trying to, where I'm at now, we're trying to remind the teams, it's not only plan your day, but don't forget you have a commitment for the sprint. So make sure, one of the most glorious stand-ups a couple of weeks ago, a team was getting towards the end of the sprint. Somebody said they were going to start a new ticket. A team member said, hang on, let's talk about it. They talked about it. And I just about died and went to heaven. I thought that was glorious. And we're trying to get other teams to do that. The challenge with a lot of this is if you just direct the teams to do and tell them, stop doing that and start doing that, pretty soon, then they don't have to worry anymore because Clay or somebody's going to come along and tell them what to do. So that's something that you kind of have to be constantly reminding them about what their expectations are. So don't let your stand-ups turn into 4 people show up, 4 people say I'm doing 4 totally different things and the stand-up's over, right? Make sure the team's holding themselves accountable. Let's talk about retrospectives, which are very, very near and dear to my heart. Of everything that I've got to talk to you all about today, retrospectives are one of the things that are, for a lot of teams, hard to do, but I think that they are critical because it's that whole constant cycle. Let's plan to do something a certain way. Let's do it. Let's look at the results. Are we happy or not happy? Do we need to make any changes? Let's make a few simple changes and do it again. And we want to do that every 2 weeks. So retrospectives are something that I remember the very first Agile conference I went to, maybe 2012 or 2013, and I went there with a mission and I talked to everybody that I could talk to. How are you doing retrospectives? How's it going? Give me some tips and tricks. And I left disappointed. Well, you know, sometimes we do them, or, you know, we just let the team decide. If they have a bad sprint, they do them. If they have a good sprint, no, it's just, you know, keep doing what you're doing. I feel very strongly about this. So here's what I like to see for the retrospectives that I facilitate or the expectations of the retrospectives that I do not facilitate, because I do some but not all of them. Make sure the teams are looking at data. There's a lot of data you can bring into a retrospective. Look at your velocity chart, look at your sprint burn down chart in Jira or wherever else. If you're producing a retrospective artifact, if you're producing a document at the end of every retrospective that says, here's what we talked about and here's what we're going to do differently moving forward, look at the last one. Because the last one you said, well, we're going to start requiring 2 developers on every code review for whatever reason. So 2 weeks later, after the next sprint, in that retrospective, are you doing what you said you were going to start doing 2 weeks ago? Because a lot of times I've seen teams, we're going to start doing this, and the retrospective's over. Oof, we don't have to talk about our feelings anymore. We're done. And they totally forget all the things that they said they were going to do. Try to help them hold each other accountable.
Yeah, that's why I would bring that up in backlog refinement when I was there. I
Yes.
put it as one of the things to review before I got to any of the stories we were going to review. I was like, during retro, we were going to do this, or talk about this, or be careful about this. And then it would be on their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of a trust but verify situation. Try to make your retrospectives fun, right? So one of the Scrum teams I'm working with now, they have an icebreaker at the start of every retrospective, 5 minutes, right? So they go around the room. Okay, we're getting close to Halloween, the most recent one. Everybody say what your most favorite Halloween costume you ever wore was, or your biggest loot haul on Halloween when you got the most candy, right? It doesn't have to be kind of a dull, dry, oh my goodness, we got to talk about our feelings and what was horrible and why we hate our jobs, or whatever they talk about in retrospectives. Also, in the retrospective artifacts, add a section where they can add shout outs or attaboys or pats on the backs. Hey, Bob, team member, I really appreciated you pair programming with me on this ticket because I really got stuck. I was a little over my head. You came in, we spent a couple hours on a Zoom call. We helped get that ticket knocked out. Thank you for the assist, right? So that they can recognize not only members of the team, but they can also recognize their product owner, Scrum Master, manager, whatever. Another
Hey,
big,
Clay, can I make a comment there?
sure.
I was going to say, so I like to run retros at multiple levels, not just at the team level. And I like to say that for teams to achieve their sprint goals and their objectives, the levels above them need to be working in a lean, agile way as well. And I always add the shout outs and attaboys to my retros, even at the program level. And often what comes out of that is a change to the way we work. Like I didn't expect it to be, but when I run a power retro where I'm like, what went well, what didn't go well, and then I rephrase it, what should we start doing, what should we stop doing, continue doing, and then I added a column for shout outs. And what surprised me was I got as many procedure changes or changes to the way we worked, or actual action items out of the shout out column as I did out of any of the other columns. Like, because somebody did something cool and it made things go more efficient, we actually changed the way we did work to the way that person had done it, who had received the shout out. I just wanted to.
That is awesome to hear, and lets me know I probably need to find a way to bubble that stuff up, because right now, where I'm at now, these retrospective artifacts are public, but they aren't really bubbled up. People can go find them, look for them and find them if they want to, but it's not a requirement. But that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, virtually I would do those power retros in 30 minutes or less, and I would do them in Trello. And I would use the Kanban board in Trello because I didn't have any other tool I could use. And I would use the sign up for a card feature to do dot voting. Anyway, if you're interested, I can show you how I did it. But I would literally turn it into process and procedure changes from not just from the stop doing, start doing, and continue doing, but oftentimes the best changes came from the shout outs.
That's awesome to hear, and reinforces that it's not only for the team, but the team may, if everybody's saying this thing is great,
yeah,
it'd be good to spread that to other teams as well, not keep that in the team by team silos. So
yeah,
make sure everybody talks in a retro, no wallflowers, right? Even if it's as simple as at the beginning, when the team begins discussion, I may ask, I want to hear every team member say a few words about how the last sprint went, right? Nobody gets to say, well, same thing as Bob. No, not same thing as Bob. I want to hear what you think about the sprint, right? Most teams are really good at this. This is not really a huge problem, but just make sure that you don't have anybody, right? The reason we play planning poker is we don't want to say, yeah, I'll go with Bob's 5 on that story, not an 8. Yeah, right. We want to make sure everybody speaks, their voices are heard. And like Mike just talked about, it doesn't always have to be tactical. Code reviews and SQL statements and pull requests and GitHub. It can be things that the team says, we're really not happy with our stand-up occurring at 8 o'clock in the morning. We want to move it to 9:30. Super. Move your stand-up to 9:30, right? Last thing, and I've kind of touched on this, is an artifact, an output. We do require that the teams produce something that says, here's the decision that we made, right? And it needs to be such that somebody who wasn't there can reasonably understand the decisions were made. So if the output is, we're going to do gooder next time, well, that's a goal. It might be a good goal, but what are you going to do to be gooder, right? So if the team is really struggling, just use the template of, in order to blank, we're going to blank. In order to improve quality, we're going to have 2 developers review every pull request, not 1. Okay, so I know we're trying to get our quality better, and we're now going to double the number of eyes on reviewing code in a pull request. So this artifact, if the team has had a little venting, some little private discussions, doesn't need to be on there. And just remind the teams, focus on what they can control, right? That doesn't mean that they shouldn't raise issues, but don't stress over the fact that the company's not giving them free Cokes anymore, right? That shouldn't be in every sprint retrospective artifact ranting and raving about Cokes. Raise the issue, but you can't control whether or not the company's going to give you free Cokes. Focus on what you can control, what the team can change. Okay. Make sure your retrospectives are useful, because if you don't, the team will start backsliding, and then they'll get in this attitude, and maybe rightfully so, that the retrospectives aren't producing results. Help them as you need. Lastly, sprint demos, sprint closing demos. Excuse me. So one of the things that the last 3 stops on my career path have been, we like doing sprint demos for the whole company, not just to a product owner, not just within the team, not to just within engineering and development team. We like to show everybody what the teams have recently completed. So what that means is, now, there's a company-wide Zoom meeting. It happens every 2 weeks on Wednesday afternoons at 1 o'clock Clay's time, whatever your particular time zones are. And each team, including the Kanban teams, are invited to show their most recently completed work. So what for Scrum teams means is, they may be in the middle of a sprint, but they're going to show their most recently completed sprint. And we do this, we show it to everybody for 3 reasons. The main reason is we want a celebration of the work that the team's completed. Look at this great stuff that we're doing for you, sales and marketing. We want to educate the stakeholders and all the other teams in engineering, because as companies get bigger and bigger and a little bit more splintered, we want to educate everybody on, here's what this team is doing, and this team is doing, and this team is doing. Maybe they're working on 3 different features. Maybe they're working on the same features, right? So we're educating. We also, the 3rd reason is we want to get feedback, right? The whole reason to show it is we want to hear, are we on the right path? Are there any significant changes that we need to consider? A couple things about getting feedback, and this hasn't happened recently, lately, but watch very carefully for demotivational language. So if you've got a stakeholder, the team shows their demo, they share their screen. Here's a new screen where the user can input some data, and they click this button and magical things happen. Don't let somebody come in and say, oh, I just can't believe we're wasting our time on that. That's horrible, because the Scrum team didn't just pull it out of the thin air. This got planned by some product folks, approved by some stakeholders, given to a Scrum team, broken into stories, socialized, sized, so many steps, so many eyes and hands on the way to actually getting code done and tested into production. Don't let that demotivational language, I would just nip that right in the bud and say, hey, Bob, great feedback. Let's get together and talk about it after the demo's over. Don't let the team get demotivated by that. Also, you got to kind of watch, like Jonathan mentioned, time boxing. You can't let this turn into a just as designed or a design session where the team is maybe showing a partial feature and they're telling everybody this feature is not complete. We need 2 more sprints to get this feature complete before it's going to go in production, but we want to show you where we are. Don't let a 30-minute, hey, we could also do this and add this screen and make an elephant appear if they do these things. That's not the purpose of this meeting. Maybe let it go for a minute or 2, but then you got to kind of nip that in the bud and say, hey, get with your product folks, your product owner, your product team. That's a great discussion outside of this meeting. Because otherwise, if you get 6, 7, or 8 teams presenting and you let that kind of stuff go on, next thing you know, you've got a 3-hour meeting, which people will start complaining about a 3-hour meeting. So what we do today for each team, since the stakeholders may not be plugged in, this may be their only recurring plug-in to what engineering development is doing. So we ask each team to follow these 3 steps in their demo. Remind everybody what you saw last demo 2 weeks ago. Tell them what you're going to see today. Show them the stuff today, and then tell them here's what you can see expect to see in the next 2 weeks. Like, we're going to continue working on this feature, and we hope in the next 2 weeks we're going to have the screen fully fleshed out, because it's not right now, ready for more feedback. We do also recommend, since stakeholders may not know Jira and Jira tickets, or maybe their eyes glaze over when you start talking about that, try to avoid talking about ticket numbers. And if there's some bugs that you fix that you don't necessarily want to show, because bugs aren't very exciting, mention them. Hey, and we also fixed these 3 bugs. It can be just 3 bullet points on a slide. Record the demo, put it up where everybody, somewhere on SharePoint where everybody can see it. And then if the teams have any presentation, like pre-recorded demos, slide decks, charts, graphs, put that all up somewhere. So if folks miss the demo, because like a lot of your senior leadership, if they get triple or quadruple booked, they may not come to the demo. They may be talking to clients, doing other work. Make sure they can go back and watch it and make sure it's meaningful. And that, as they say, is that. So any questions, comments about what we've seen so far? I am going to have to ask a question of y'all then. Was this meaningful in any way, shape, or fashion for what y'all do in your daily job?
I found that especially the beginning one, the Gantt chart with the stories, being able to plug in with the amount of stories and the bugs and have it there, we were able to see how this took the place of what was there based on what the capacity was. So that was very good in helping them to see how their decisions to add something
Yeah, I'll show you.
modified, affected what was planned.
Yeah, I'll show you real quick. So where I'm at now, we're modifying this, and this is obviously all dummy data. But one of the challenges that I've got it where I'm at now is some of the Scrum teams are not protected all that well, which is horrible. So we're actually going to add somewhere on here some kind of indication of here's bugs, production bugs, that the team got asked to do. So it may not qualify as significant enough work as to completely and totally derail what the plan was, but just be aware, this team, a gentle reminder, this team's not protected, and that has the potential to raise the risk of not meeting whatever plan we came up with. So if this is a good basis to start with, and you tweak it and change it and add stuff and take stuff off, groovy.
Yeah, because you can see right there, add a new feature for a client. I mean, there was 4 previously, you got to do 1, 6 were added. So I mean, yeah, it's a replace.
Yeah. This is Mike again, and I really appreciate your presentation. I think it's really relevant. With some pain and discomfort, I watch people on LinkedIn arguing about agile frameworks, and some people even saying Scrum is dead or Scrum is not agile. And I love what you're doing here. I think this is amazing. I started out as a Scrum Alliance Scrum Master a million years ago. Like, 2007-ish is when I got my Scrum Master certification. And my biggest pain in life was what you're trying to solve with this, like the lack of prioritized requirements coming to my teams, or the ability to articulate to stakeholders when they pull this off plan and then want to punish the teams because they're off plan. And I wrote in the comments, so please forgive me. I don't want to take your presentation in a direction you don't want it to go to, but I think this tool is essential. So for all those naysayers out in the, in the ether, in the web, that say that Scrum doesn't work or it's not agile, I think this is the key, is that you need to be able to communicate with your stakeholders and help them understand that teams have a certain capacity and they don't get any more or less than that capacity unless they hire more teams. And so if they're going to ask us to do something else, what is it that we've already promised to deliver or that you've asked us to work on that we can set aside or delay? And this thing is the thing that gives you the power to have that conversation. And maybe you don't, maybe safe is a dirty word in this group, but I'm a Scrum, I'm safe certified. I teach safe classes as well as Scrum classes. And this thing is almost exactly the same as the program board, which they're changing to the art planning board. But what this gives you is the information and the power. This tool that you've created, I was trying to invent this myself when I was a Scrum Master, and it's super powerful and super useful when you're able to calculate the capacity of your teams and show them, like when they ask you to do something new, what I would recommend is say, give us a moment to size it or put an estimate on it, and then show them with the work that's already in flight, how big that work is, what it's going to push out with this tool. And then they're like, oh, maybe I don't want that thing, right? So it requires transparency and communication at all levels. And it also requires that they at their level start to practice some kind of lean and agile approach to curating their backlog of work. Like down below, you've got the work that's feature size. They need to prioritize that against work you're already doing. I'll be quiet because this isn't my presentation, but I think this is awesome. I think you did a great job.
Thanks, Mike. And your points are spot on.
Cool.
Corey, I see a hand.
Yes, thank you. I also think that this is really helpful in coaching, the wider organization on trade-offs and prioritization and kind of how decisions that they try to push along will impact in-flight projects, right? And it's my organization has gone through like an agile transformation over the last few years as we've grown a lot and gone from kind of startup mode to a little bit more of like a product. We've had like a lot of investment in product development, and yeah, this is a great tool. I mean, because part of being a Scrum Master is not only to just coach your teams, your development teams and your product owner, but the wider organization. And if we can have tools like this that say, okay, we have, a certain amount of capacity in which we can get this done. And we're planning on, we usually just plan 2 sprints ahead, but we're planning on, doing these goals in these 2 sprints. And if we have somebody come along, like the product owner tries to push something into the sprint backlog, we always on our teams have that conversation of what's the trade-off. And it's good to be able to articulate that to the business and say, okay, this was your trade-off. This is why we didn't get this done, because you prioritized this over this. Or even before we accept it into a current or future sprint, we can say, this is how this is going to, adjust the timeline. Is this what you really want to do? Or this is a squeaky wheel situation, right?
No.
So this is a very powerful tool, not just for the internal Scrum team, but like all of your stakeholders in the organization.